Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving straight into the ultimate story of ancient strategic dominance. We're traveling back to a massive, absolute turning point in ancient Indian history. We're leaving behind that old Vedic period, where society was mostly just organized into these small tribal villages and clans, and we're entering an era of monumental transformation, the Mahajanapada period. Imagine a vast landscape where those tiny tribes have aggressively merged and expanded to form 16 massive, totally distinct kingdoms across the Indian subcontinent. It was an incredibly wild era of fierce competition, immense wealth, and just raw ambition.
And that brings us to the core mystery we're unpacking today. We've got 16 absolute heavyweights on the board, but out of all these powerful Mahajanapadas, how did one single state manage to swallow up its 15 rivals and become the undisputed master of the realm? Basically, how did Magadh rise above every single one of them to become ancient India's first true superpower? Well, let's find out.
Here is our roadmap for the explainer. First, the 16 Mahajanapadas and Magadh. Second, the reasons for their success. Third, the Haryanka dynasty. Fourth, the Shushunaga dynasty. And finally, the Nanda dynasty.
Section 1. The 16 Mahajanapadas and Magadh.
To really understand Magadh's victory, you have to understand the vast playing field we're dealing with here. It stretched all the way from Gandhara in the rugged northwest, which is modern-day Pakistan and Afghanistan, all the way down to Ashmaka in the deep south, right near the Godavari River. This whole board was packed with powerful players like Koshal, Avanti, and the Vajji Confederacy. So why did the established northern states fall behind while this eastern state of Magadh just surged ahead? Well, honestly, the northern states stagnated. They got deeply entangled in complex religious rituals, orthodox traditions, and these really rigid caste rules. They just stopped innovating. Magadh, on the other hand, experienced a lot less of the strict Aryanization. Because they were sitting on the eastern fringes, they just weren't bound by those same orthodox restrictions, and that allowed them to be incredibly pragmatic. While everyone else was busy performing rituals, the leaders of Magadh were meticulously planning, innovating their agriculture, clearing out forests, and focusing purely on strategic action and building their economic growth.
Section 2. Reasons for Magadh's success. Now, mindset alone doesn't build an empire, right? You need resources. And the historical sources reveal that Magadh basically had geographical cheat codes. They had these massive, unfair natural advantages. Incredibly dense forests gave them a virtually endless supply of timber for building chariots and cities. But even more importantly, those forests provided a steady supply of wild elephants for their absolutely invincible elephant army, the Gadsena. Plus, they were sitting right on top of rich iron mines, which gave them vastly stronger, much more durable weapons than their rivals who were still swinging bronze. On top of all that, they were totally surrounded by major rivers like the Ganga, the San, and the Gandak. These rivers provided extremely cheap natural trade routes, super fertile land for a booming agricultural surplus, and allowed them to build Jaldurug, literally impenetrable water forts. Nature practically handed them an empire on a silver platter.
Section 3. Haryanka Dynasty. Diplomacy and Expansion.
So, this era introduces us to the highly ambitious Haryanka family. They're actually darkly known in history as the Patricide dynasty, simply because the sons kept violently murdering their own fathers to get the throne. But it started off brilliantly with King Bimbisara. His strategy was an absolute masterclass in diplomacy. You see, Bimbisara expanded Magadh not really through war, but through incredibly strategic marriage alliances. Legend actually says he had hundreds of wives. He married the princess of Koshal, Mahakoshala, and literally got the insanely rich territory of Kashi purely as a dowry. He married Chelna from the powerful Vajji Confederacy, which instantly secured his northern border and gave him immense prestige. And get this, one of the most surprising details from the sources is that when the fierce king of Avanti fell terminally ill, Bimbisara didn't attack. Nope. Instead, he sent his own brilliant royal physician, Jivaka, who actually cured the rival king. In an instant, a massive military threat was turned into a deeply indebted lifelong ally. So basically, without shedding a single drop of blood, Bimbisara made Magadh incredibly secure.
But of course, peace doesn't last forever. Enter Bimbisara's son, Ajatashatru. Completely impatient for power, Ajatashatru brutally murdered his own father to seize the throne. And as you can imagine, this triggered a really dramatic and violent transition. Those surrounding kingdoms, the ones whose princesses were happily married to the murdered Bimbisara, were absolutely furious. So just like that, diplomacy was completely dead. Under Ajatashatru, Magadha shifted entirely away from alliances and leaned directly into sheer, ruthless military force, immediately igniting wars with his father's former ally.
So, how exactly did this ruthless force build an empire? Well, Ajatashatru set his sights on the mighty Vajji Confederacy, which was an incredibly fierce alliance of 8 united republics. But he wasn't foolish. He knew a direct assault would be absolute suicide. So what did he do? He actually went and consulted the Buddha, who advised him that as long as Vajji remained perfectly united, they were completely invincible. So, Ajatashatru waited. For 8 long years, he patiently held off his attack. Instead, he sent his cunning minister and top spy Visakhara to secretly infiltrate Vajji. Visakhara slowly, methodically sowed seeds of suspicion and discord among their leaders. And once that deeply united confederacy was internally fractured and fighting amongst themselves, that's when Ajatashatru finally unleashed his military might and entirely crushed them.
And let me tell you, the military might he unleashed was absolutely terrifying. This is exactly where Magadh's immense iron wealth really shows up. Ajatashatru deployed 2 state-of-the-art superweapons that ancient India had literally never seen before. First, the Shilakantaka. Think of this as a wildly powerful early catapult, capable of hurling massive, crushing boulders at the enemy from a safe distance. And then there was the Rathamusala. Imagine an armored, enclosed chariot, basically an ancient tank, equipped with heavy, swinging iron maces that would just crash through enemy lines and completely shatter fortress gates. Armed with these terrifying weapons, Ajatashatru utterly crushed his rivals and vastly expanded the borders of the empire.
Section 4. The Shishinagana Dynasty and New Leadership.
Eventually, the Haryanka dynasty began to seriously weaken, largely due to that constant patricide. The citizens eventually had enough. They ended up backing a highly capable minister named Shishunaga, who stepped right up, removed the weak descendants of the Haryanka line, and took the throne for himself. Tracking his reign reveals a really fascinating military strategy, constantly shifting capitals. The capital of Magadh was always moving to serve the empire's immediate needs. It originally started in Rajgriha, which was this amazing natural fortress completely surrounded by 5 hills. Then it had moved to Pataliputra, strategically founded right at the confluence of major rivers for incredible water defense and lucrative trade. But when Shishunaga took over, he was facing a massive, dangerous rebellion from that recently conquered Vajji territory. So what's his move? He strategically uproots his entire capital and all his military headquarters and moves it right into the very heart of the rebellion at Vaishali, just to crush the dissent. It's a massive flex. Once the region was finally stabilized, his son Kalashoka moved the capital permanently back to the economic and strategic hub of Pataliputra.
Section 5. The Nanda Dynasty, the absolute zenith of Magadh. We have now arrived at the climax. The Nandas inherited a massive, heavily consolidated empire. We're talking an unimaginably large standing army and literal hordes of immense wealth. By this point in time, all the major rival Mahajanapadas had been completely absorbed. Now, the most famous ruler of this specific dynasty was its founder, Mahapadmananda. The historical texts give him these titles that really highlight his sheer terror and just absolute authority. He openly called himself Ekarat, meaning the sole sovereign of the entire realm. But even more chillingly, he was known as Sarvakshatrantika, the destroyer of all Kshatriyas. Coming from a non-royal, lower-class background, he clearly had a fierce chip on his shoulder, and he relentlessly, brutally crushed every single remaining rival warrior dynasty across the subcontinent just to ensure his total undisputed supremacy.
And what's really amazing here is that we actually have solid historical proof of his massive reach that is still visible today. He didn't just rule the north, he actually pushed down and conquered the very distant southern region of Kalinga, which is modern-day Odisha. We know this for a fact because an ancient rock inscription down there literally mentions his conquest. It also records that he built the Tamsuli Canal, which is incredible because that is the earliest recorded canal in all of Indian history. Plus, his court wasn't just about war. It was a major center of brilliance. He patronized the legendary scholar of Panini, who wrote the Ashtadhyayi, which is the foundational, definitive text of Sanskrit grammar.
But as is so often the case, exactly as the empire reached its absolute peak, the seeds of its ultimate downfall were being planted. We have to introduce the final Nanda ruler, Dhanananda. He was actually a contemporary of Alexander the Great. In fact, the sheer terrifying size of Dhanananda's army is cited as one of the main reasons Alexander's troops literally mutinied and just refused to march any further into India. But internally, Dhanananda was a total disaster. He deeply alienated his own people by imposing these crushing, heavy taxes. He was hoarding just immense wealth without investing a single coin back into public welfare or infrastructure. He basically fell into a really fatal arrogance.
And all of this leads us to a truly fascinating historical irony.
Dhanananda honestly thought his endless wealth and his massive army made him totally invincible, but his fatal arrogance led him to deeply and very publicly insult a brilliant, incredibly fiery scholar at his court named Chanakya. That single, arrogant insult sparked a legendary vow of revenge. So how exactly did this perfectly consolidated, wealthy, yet completely stagnant Magadh Empire create the exact political vacuum needed for Chanakya to mentor a young, exiled boy named Chandragupta Maurya? A boy who would rise up, completely overthrow the Nandas, and unite almost the entire Indian subcontinent? Well, that is a fantastic story for another day, but I hope this explainer has shown you exactly how Magadh built the unshakable foundations for absolutely everything that followed. Thanks so much for learning with me today.